Hello, everyone. Welcome back. This is Kevin Shipp, of course, coming to you from what used to be my secret little studio on our off-the-grid farm until we had some flyovers with spotlights on. So I guess they had to map us anyway. Anyway, aside from that, I am beginning my full expose on criminal activity by the CIA, illegal CIA redactions of documents, unclassified information that is damaging to the CIA. And in my upcoming book, Twilight of the Shadow Government, How Transparency Will Kill the Deep State, I go into great detail, myself and my co-author, Kent Heckenlively, go into great detail about CIA criminal activity and corruption. Now, I am sacrificing perhaps my royalties for the book. I think the CIA will come and try to take those. I may be sacrificing my freedom if the CIA comes back and tries to claim there's anything classified in Twilight, which there isn't. I was a classifying authority in the CIA. I know what's classified and what's not. So if they try to make those claims, we will fight that in open court. So the reason I'm doing this is someone has to. I think the season and the time is right for the American people to demand reform of the CIA. And I talk about that in the book Twilight and give some specific steps for CIA reform and how to eliminate the CIA's unbridled power of secrecy to conceal not only the huge budget it has with our tax dollars and throws around with like bags of money to Mohammed Karzai, and I was supervisor of his protective detail, money that we never knew where it went. I think it went to drug lords in Afghanistan. The secret budget we know nothing about, and even more than that, CIA criminal activities and spying on Americans that the CIA will redact in books or attempt to invoke the state secrets privilege to seal any evidence against them. I think it is time for that to stop. It's time for it to change. It's gone on too long. The last oversight of the CIA was the Church Committee, which began to reveal some of the atrocities the CIA was doing. And subsequently, they destroyed Frank Church's career, and he lost his reelection. Also, the CIA went after the other members of his panel, threatening them not to bring forth the information or they would be destroyed. There's an actual quote by the CIA threatening Frank Church. That is the last congressman that ever stood up to the CIA in real oversight. The congressional oversight committees, intelligence committees now, they are basically, in my opinion, a sham. They are not going to investigate the CIA in any depth. They know it would be the end of their career, that the CIA and its willing accomplices in the media would destroy them, their reelection, their finances, and even worse. So we're not going to see another church committee unless it's demanded by the American people. And we need to make that demand. And the point I make in the book Twilight is there needs to be an avalanche of public demand for reform of the CIA, breaking away its covert operational authority, which it really doesn't have. The National Security Act of 1947 did not grant the CIA the authority to do what it's doing now, to become a secret global juggernaut, engaging in coups and assassinations and other things. That was not the wording in the National Security Act of 1947. Within 2 years, the CIA had gone rogue, and even Harry Truman wrote an op-ed, a couple of them, saying that he regretted even forming the CIA because it had gotten way outside of the Constitution. Since then, it's a global juggernaut operating in secret with billions of our tax dollars, engaging in coups, for example, the 2014 coup in Ukraine and others, going way back, engaging in coups and attacking and destroying anyone that stands against it, especially whistleblowers on the inside who have seen legitimate criminal activity. So what I want to do in this program is I want to go through some of the excerpts in my former book, From the Company of Shadows, that the CIA heavily redacted. And I'll get into exactly the legal ramifications of what they did. But I want to show you what they redacted and show you that not only is it not classified, it is very damaging to the CIA and its criminal activity and a cover-up. So bear with me. I'm going to bring up this document on the screen. It's very important. And I'm going to go through point by point on how the CIA has violated an executive order issued by President Ronald Reagan, still stands today. And they violated it routinely with almost every author that submits a book to the CIA. They will redact things that are far from classified. So let me bring up this document and we'll go through it. The end of the CIA illegal redactions used to conceal criminal activity. Here's the executive order 12356 instituted by Ronald Reagan, still in effect today. Part 1, section 1.6a, limitations on classification. This is important. A, in no case shall information be classified in order to conceal violations of law, inefficiency, or administrative error, to prevent embarrassment to a person, organization, or agency, to restrain competition or prevent or delay the release of information that does not require protection in the interest of national security. And let me tell you right here, everybody, the poisoning of my family and the illness of my wife and children were not issues of national security. B, basic scientific or research information not clearly related to the national security may not be classified. Now, what I am stating here is the CIA committed a felony based on this executive order and redacted unclassified but damaging information in my book, From the Company of Shadows. What are the penalties for violating an executive order? Well, here they are. Civil fines, administrative or business licensing repercussions, criminal penalties, imprisonment, community service. Boy, would I like to see the director of the CIA doing some community service, wouldn't you? Cancellation, termination, or suspension of a contract, ineligibility for future government contracts. A famous case of a courageous CIA officer, I think one of the last in our history that stood up to the CIA, was Victor Marchetti. And in U.S. versus Marchetti, and I want to make this clear, I want this out there on the record, and please, you all, as you're watching this, if you haven't subscribed, hit the subscribe button on this channel and the bell, because I'm going to be releasing a lot more information on the CIA's criminal activity and their cover-ups. Let's get back to U.S. versus Marchetti. In violation of U.S. v. Marchetti, the agency held on to the document that Marchetti had written. It was called The Cult of Intelligence, that he submitted for pre-publication review. They held on to it for 6 months, which they did From the Company of Shadows, my book, while our family suffered. Excuse me, I'm talking about our family here. My apologies. This paragraph is talking about my actual family. In violation of U.S. versus Marchetti, the agency held on to the document, that is my manuscript, From the Company of Shadows, that I submitted to the pre-publication review. They held on to it for 6 months while our family suffered economic destruction instituted by the CIA. And I have just published a recording I took of the CIA credit union, chief of the credit union, admitting that there was CIA retribution, canceling of our hardship loans, removal of the lady who disappeared, that executed and signed the loans, increasing the interest on our loans in the CIA credit union, and threatening to repossess our automobiles. There is a tape. I have that on tape. I published that on my Patreon channel at patreon.com/Kevin_Shipp. Marchetti's rights. Quote, as we have said, however, Marchetti, and this is directly from the case, as we have said, however, Marchetti, by accepting employment with the CIA and by signing a secrecy agreement, which I signed, did not surrender his First Amendment right to free speech. The Constitution is the supreme law of our land. And we will see that the CIA violates the Constitution routinely and has for decades now, and has gotten away with, hopefully until now. Goes on, the agreement is enforceable only because it is not a violation of those rights. We would decline enforcement of the secrecy oath signed when Marchetti, left the employment of the CIA, to the extent that it purports to prevent disclosure of unclassified information, for, to that extent, the oath would be in contravention of his First Amendment rights. In other words, if the information is not classified, the CIA cannot redact it or black it out. Goes on, thus Marchetti retains the right to speak and write about the CIA and its operations, and to criticize it as any other citizen may, but he may not disclose classified information obtained by him during the course of his employment, which is not already in the public domain. I think for most people that's a duh. No CIA officer, and especially a CIA whistleblower, has any intention of releasing anything classified. In my case, I was a classifying authority. I know what's classified and what isn't. What you're about to see are the redactions that the CIA made that are far from classified. But we all agree that there's certain sources and methods that need to be protected. Our troop movements, if we have operations against a terrorist cell, and other things like that. There's no question about that. I think we all support that. It goes on. Because we're dealing with prior restraint upon speech, we think the CIA must act promptly to approve or disapprove any material. Promptly. When I was the senior briefer for enter-on-duty employees of all levels, from secretaries to case officers to military liaison, generals, lieutenants, I would give the initial briefing on the CIA, their first briefing, and routinely I would have people come up afterwards and tell me, for example, one guy, I submitted a document for pre-publication review to the CIA, and it's been 5 years. They've held on to it and haven't even communicated back or responded to my queries. Others, 1 year, 2 years. You see, I hadn't bothered to respond back to that author. I cite someone I worked with a few years ago, James Atkins of Granite Island Group, which is a great group on technical security countermeasures. James told me that he submitted his TSCM technical capabilities in a paper to the CIA, hoping that maybe they would hire him on contract. Instead, according to James, the CIA took his report, classified it, and then sent him a note saying, your report is now classified. You don't have a clearance, so you don't have access to your report. They've been doing that kind of stuff for decades, everyone. And let's go on. Because we are dealing with a prior restraint upon speech, we think that the CIA must act promptly to approve or disapprove any material. The original deadline, excuse me, for the CIA was 30 days. They never keep that. They never have kept that. They thumb their nose at that. 6 months to a year is usually the average before they black spray paint everything out in the book. I know in John Kiriakow's book, they even blacked out the name of his wife. Things like that. They've been getting away with this for years. Undue delay would impair the reasonableness of the restraint, and that reasonableness is to be maintained if the restraint is to be enforced. We should think that in all events, the maximum period for responding after the submission of material for approval should not exceed 30 days. That is a court ruling. That is a court ruling that the CIA is supposed to be bound by legally, and they violate that probably daily with the manuscripts they receive. Others, authors I won't mention here, perhaps later, I'll do a program with them. They held on to their document for a year and then sent it back spray painted with black redactions. They violate this to an extreme. And in some cases, 2 years. The most extreme case that came up and talked to me was 5 years. All right, here's From the Company of Shadows, the book I wrote. It's out on Amazon. And I want to show you their criminal redactions of the evidence I presented in this book. The same evidence that caused a federal district judge in Texas to order the CIA to a mediated settlement in Washington, D.C. You all know that story because of my evidence, which I presented before the CIA, OGC, Office of General Counsel, employees, my attorneys. The evidence that I presented caused the CIA to settle. That day, they signed all the settlement agreement paperwork, of which I have copies. And then 3 days later, they contacted my attorney and said, if Mr. Shipp does not accept a lower settlement, we're going to invoke the state secrets privilege or the evidentiary privilege, and we're going to seal his entire case. That was blackmail. My response was, we don't get blackmailed. I don't get blackmailed. No, we've got the signed document, and they need to abide by it. And hence, just after that, the CIA invoked the state's secrets privilege, a gross misuse of that privilege. And that'll come in following programs. This list demonstrates that it is not classified, not a source or method relating to national security, and contains no foreign intelligence information or vulnerabilities to national security. Even in the remotest sense, all environmental test results, which I did secretly without the CIA's knowledge, doctor's diagnosis, which I did without the CIA's knowledge on this basis, my family was seriously ill. Psychiatric diagnosis, my son was diagnosed with severe PTSD, as was my wife. Photographs of the contamination, which I took. Letters to Congress and events witnessed by our family members exist in the public domain and are unclassified. All of the included documents issued by the government are unclassified. Our family story is documented in public court records covering the deposition held to settle our family's rental insurance claim against a private insurance, which they settled immediately when they saw the evidence. The same evidence that the CIA redacted in my book. The insurance company that was held in the office of a private law firm, and that deposition with a mysterious gentleman sitting in the back, put there by the CIA, that deposition was attended by several individuals in that law firm with no government clearance as we presented this information. They almost drove my wife to suicide. She was so sick and was losing she lost all of her property, furniture, dresses, and I'll get into her priceless heirlooms later. Just an attempt at absolute destruction of not just me, but my family, who apparently, clearly, without question, were collateral damage, and they still suffer today. Here is the evidence that I presented. You'll see later that this was blacked out in my manuscript. 1, all public doctors' written diagnosis of the family's medical issues. They redacted all public environmental company test results done in the government housing the family was living in. 3, all references to the word family. They redacted the word family. All references to my children, any reference to my children was redacted. All references to my wife, Lorena, and 3 children that were living on a government site and had become ill were redacted. My public environmental test results on the materials in the house we were living in, sent to a national expert at a U.S. university and 2 public environmental testing companies not affiliated with any government activity. The results of those tests were blacked out, redacted in my manuscript. 7, all references to our family's symptoms or illnesses, blacked out, redacted by the CIA. 8, all references to the loss of our personal property and the family's resulting financial situation were redacted. Their destruction of us financially, accounts of that in the book, were redacted or blacked out. 9, all sections by the public decontamination company used to decontaminate our family's personal property and destroy property that could not be decontaminated, which was 90% of everything that we owned. I managed to get them to decontaminate my wife's priceless heirlooms, and more on that later. 10, all use of our lawyers' names. They redacted the names of our lawyers. 11, the public insurance company's inspection of the house. 12, the public insurance deposition resulting from the family's rental insurance property loss claim. 13, they redacted descriptions of the serious illnesses of other residents on this site who were experiencing similar symptoms: dementia, severe headaches, bedridden, serious symptoms of extreme toxic exposure. And I'll talk more about that later. Those descriptions, our next door neighbor, for example, the neighbor across the street, originally they thought he had a brain tumor because he was losing feeling on one side and having serious problems with concentration and memory. Doctors couldn't find a thing other than toxic exposure. That was redacted by the CIA. Descriptions of the contaminants found in the house at the site. That includes the black mold Stachybotrys and Aspergillus, which were throughout the house in the walls. And it also includes the mustard gas shell that percolated up in our yard that my son Joey found, called me over, and I saw it also. At that point, not knowing what they were going to do, I said, throw that away, knowing that it was somewhat classified that the CIA had. Well, it wasn't classified anymore. It's open source and EPA records that the CIA on that base had buried mustard gas there that they had used as a chemical weapon. Well, one of those shells percolated up in our yard. We were never able to get a company in there to test for mustard gas exposure. And as you'll see in a later broadcast, the CIA destroyed that house and paved it over with cement. Essentially, of course, destroying evidence. 15, references to the removal of records documenting environmental hazards in the house. The chief of base, Chris, who I hope someday is held accountable for this, went down and ordered that all records to the condition of that house, environmental hazards in that house, all records of the condition of the house, had them removed from official records on the base, and they never saw them again. Apparently, they were destroyed. Even the FBI came in, and Lisa, who was an awesome FBI agent, we did an investigation, possible counterintelligence investigation on that base, to which the CIA was fuming. She found, as I did, that they had removed these records documenting the house, and she took me aside and said, "Kevin, can I ask you a question?" I said, "Yeah, Lisa, what's up?" Because I'd built a relationship of trust with her. She was an honest agent. She said, "Do you think you're being set up?" And at that point, in my ignorance, I said, Well, I don't think so. I think this is just gross negligence. Well, it turns out Lisa was right. I was being set up without a question, and I prove it and have the evidence, of course. 16, references to orders to destroy the house after the family's departure. Chris ordered that ordered that the house be destroyed just after we left. My attorney Clint ordered them, put a stay on that, ordered that they could not, in the midst of our legal battle, destroy evidence. And so he held off until after we were gone. And sometime after that, they paved it over with cement. And I have a photograph of that taken from Google Earth. 17, eyewitness descriptions by my family, our attorneys, and me of falsification of documents. The CIA falsified my grievance. First, they removed it from the cable system, which is illegal. Secondly, the OGC people claimed that, well, they didn't have a copy of the grievance. And let me explain, this grievance was very powerful and full of evidence. The Office of General Counsel stated, well, we don't have your grievance, and Clint and Jeep were both there during this meeting. And I pressed the OGC lady, got right up in her face and said, you better go find that grievance or I'm coming in there to find it myself. She emerged back in about 20 minutes with a one-page handwritten document written in someone else's handwriting, basically saying there was no contamination in the house. My grievance was about 12 pages of evidence. And that went on and on. Later on, 2 security officers got me in a room, and I went in there with them, and it was interrogators interrogating a former interrogator, and they knew it. And those 2 security officers tried to get me to recant my grievance. And she pulled out the grievance, which everybody says they didn't know about and that they couldn't find. She pulls it out and orders me to redact or recant what I put in that grievance, or I would be under investigation. To which, of course, I respectfully refused and advised them that that meeting was over. 18, the account of public environmental inspector who documented contamination in the existing house and provided us with a report. And the ServPro environmental inspector, Kathy L., and I'll read one of her letters later. Kathy L. went in the house and got so sick her tongue swelled up, she had to get out of there. And her conclusion was officially that the house was definitely contaminated, including the property that was in it. As I filed suit against the CIA for this, for the toxic exposure and the illness of my wife and kids, I got a call from Kathy, who was a very nice lady, very honest lady. And she said, I just wanted to tell you, I'm so sorry. I can't be on your case anymore with the contamination. I've been given an offer that I can't refuse. She'd been given that offer by the environmental company the CIA had hired to work on that base. In other words, the CIA's environmental company offered her a salary she couldn't refuse, and she left our case. Later on, she wrote me a letter, actually responded to my website in a posting, which I will read later, where she deeply regretted what they'd done to us, and the truth never came out. Later on that, 19, the shooting of the environmental inspector that issued a study calling the government's environmental study erroneous. This environmental inspector, I won't mention his name right now for his protection. He issued a study basically proving the CIA attempted to do a false study with the doors and windows open and claimed that there was nothing in the house. He took their study and the results of the testing that I did and issued a report stating that the government CIA's study was erroneous. 3 months later, as he and his fiance were pulling out of a drive-through fast food place, a vehicle pulled up and shot him in the head, execution style, shot her in the spine, paralyzing her from the waist down. I'm not going to make any conclusions about that. That's just what happened. But this account was blacked out, redacted by the CIA from the company's shadows. Why? 20, my setting of physical and electronic traps in the house while the family was evacuated and those traps being activated. I trapped the house with, it's kind of funny, that's another story, but a motion-activated tape recorder from Radio Shack and alarm zone, little motion detector, and tape seals on the doors and windows. They set off the motion-activated tape recorder, they set off the motion-activated alarm, and they broke all 5 tape seals. Sometimes the CIA, they're so arrogant and they've got so much power, but sometimes they can just be dumber than a rock. 21, Results of my research on the health hazards of toxic mold and mycotoxins. I listed the symptoms my family was having. Then I listed the symptoms of toxic mold exposure and exposure to the bioweapon mycotoxins. That was all redacted in from the company of shadows in the manuscript by the CIA. All references to public environmental inspections. 23, 2 public psychiatrist diagnoses of Lorena and my son Joel suffering from PTSD, and my youngest children suffering from psychological trauma and experiencing regular nightmares. The CIA blacked that out, redacted it in my manuscript. And it goes on and on and on, and I don't want to spend too much time on this. You can see these. I'll give you a chance to read them on your own as we go along. And I'll continue. Now, I want to show you the exact redactions that the CIA did and from the company's shadows. And as I write here, below is the government's blacked out or redacted version of the above paragraphs. The story was written in the third person using pseudonyms for our family, written about John Doe, Ann Doe, Johnny Doe, Mark Doe, and Barbie Doe. All names of government officials were replaced with pseudonyms, and the name of the site where these events occurred was never identified. I was a CIA classifying authority, as I said. There was no classified information in the manuscript, and all documentation was a matter of public record. Why is the CIA trying to conceal this information? Here's chapter 14 in the book called Agony and Injury. It was chapter 14. Now, and you can see this in from the company of shadows, but it's of course blacked out, redacted. Here's what they blacked out, redacted. This is an account of a cover-up by the CIA. It involved the serious injury of Jane and her children due to the CIA's negligence, causing their family to be exposed to life-threatening toxic substances which existed in the house the family was assigned to. And as I've said in previous programs, the CIA knew that house was contaminated. They evacuated the security officer and his family prior to us because they were so sick. They knew it was contaminated when they put us in there. And I think there was a reason for that, which I go into in another program. Let's go on. What that existed in the house the family was assigned to because of John's position as second in command. I was listed as the XO. It resulted, and you can check public records for that. It resulted in the loss of their personal property, diagnosed PTSD of Jane and Johnny, and significant medical bills. I think our medical bills were something like $10,000. John was a top performing CIA agent. I was a category 1 security officer. And now, some people call that tier 1. I don't want that to be confused with a tier 1 operator like in the SEALs or Delta. I was not even close to those guys. I worked with them. I had one of them on one of my teams, and you know, if they come into a restaurant, I give them my chair. So, when the term top tier is used anywhere in the book or the endorsements, it's referring to I was a top tier security performer or a category 1 security performer in the CIA. I've been awarded 2 meritorious unit citations for my leadership in life-threatening operations, one of which was potentially one way. Received 3 exceptional performance awards for my operational work, and my security file was spotless. The CIA redacted this. Let's go on. John was advised that because he was a government employee and signed a secrecy agreement, he had given up his personal rights to a trial. CIA employees are not told this when they are hired. After a long and agonizing legal battle, the Doe family's personal injury lawsuit was dismissed in federal court, citing the state's secrets privilege. This prevented congressional and public scrutiny and denied the family, including Jane and the children, their constitutional rights. This is how the CIA did it. I'll talk about this as I close in a little bit. Because the CIA knew that its redactions were a violation of Executive Order 12356, because they knew that was illegal, they illegally invoked the state's secrets privilege after trying to blackmail us, and use the state's secrets privilege as a reason to black all of this information out. Now, you tell me what in here is classified or a risk to national security. None of it. A risk to exposing CIA criminal activity? You bet it is. Let's go on. The original manuscript describing the story that John, that would be me, submitted to the CIA was heavily blacked out or redacted. Nothing in the document was classified. It did, however, document embarrassing and potentially illegal activity on the part of the CIA. 2 examples among many are as follows, and I'm about to wrap this up because there's a lot more to go in another program. This is what they blacked out or redacted. Jane and the children were suffering symptoms of severe toxic exposure. The children were bleeding from their noses, had strange rashes on the exposed parts of their bodies. We have photographs of that. Were vomiting and had severe headaches. Jane was that's my former wife, Jane was bedridden with headaches so severe she had to be treated with Demerol. She lost her short-term memory. Actually, she was experiencing dementia, and it was pretty bad. Johnny was diagnosed by an immunologist as having the onset of severe immune system disorder. After thousands of dollars of tests, a second immunologist, the first immunologist, told us that it was like Joey had been exposed to a burst of radiation. That was his quote, his diagnosis. Took him to a second immunologist. Excuse me. A second immunologist diagnosed him with severe immune system deficiency due to exposure to some significant toxin. In his words, Johnny's immune system resembled that. Here we go. I'm sorry. Here it is down here. In his words, Johnny's immune system resembled that of someone exposed to a burst of radiation. Doctor's quote. It goes on, the redacted portion. After several requests to have the family's government quarters tested, all of which were refused by the CIA, John used his position to press the issue at headquarters in Washington, D.C. Matter of fact, since I had the authority, I got my attorney, Clint, cleared before the CIA could stop it. They always stop you trying to get your own attorney, and they demand that you use theirs. Talk about a debt stacked against the plaintiff. Anyway, the CIA eventually was forced to conduct its own environmental test after concealing a test by an impartial environmental company. That's the fellow that was shot in the head. The test was fabricated, testing the indoor air of the house with the doors and windows open. This was the first environmental company that tested the house and said that there was, at the very least, toxic black mold. I'm holding back on the name of that company, although I can give it. I just don't want to make them a target. But this was from the first environmental company. The second environmental inspector, who was an expert witness in several cases, he's the one that issued the report that proved that the CIA's so-called test was erroneous. Let's go on. John secretly collected his own samples and with proper chain of custody using Federal Express had them tested by a reputable university. The samples showed contamination. John also had a local environmental expert examine the test results in the CIA's report. He issued a 1-inch thick document detailing errors in the CIA report and documenting evidence of contamination in the house. The family was eventually evacuated and ordered back to Washington. 4 months after the report, the family's environmental expert was shot in the head by a mysterious gunman. In the unsolved case, police stated the gunman, quote, knew what he was doing, unquote. In the original manuscript John submitted to the government, he described this incident as it was reported in the news media, with no insinuation that the CIA was responsible for the shootings. The CIA, however, blacked out or redacted this portion of the document. This was public information reported by the news media. And I have to tell you, too, although I have copies of these, about 2 months after the shooting, all of the news media accounts were washed off of the internet. You couldn't find them. I've got copies, of course, of all of them, but they were expunged from news media reporting. Goes on. This was public information reported by the news media. Why was the CIA so concerned about this information becoming public? Now, here's what the CIA did. Remember, I went through that list of evidence that I had presented to the judge, which forced them to mediation. Here's that same list. Let me scroll down to it here. Here's that same list that I put in my manuscript for CIA review. And that list I just read you earlier is here. All of the evidence is redacted. So no one can see it. They thought. So no one can see it and see what they had done. Okay, here we go. This is all the evidence I collected. Matter of fact, the judge told the CIA attorneys they tried to have a secret meeting excluding our attorneys in Texas, where this site was. Finally, the judge told the CIA Officer General Counsel goons, he said, well, looks like Mr. Shipp has you over a barrel, because he had seen the evidence. So the CIA proceeded in its conspiracy to conceal this evidence and what had happened to our family, the break-ins to our house, and the things that they did after that. I won't go into this, but here's the subchapter exposure. This goes into the subchapter exposure and lists the symptoms as they begin to happen to our family, bloody noses, and some of which I've already described. On the way out of Texas, when we finally got the CIA to evacuate us, because I'd already presented evidence to a judge, they evacuated us back to Washington, D.C. On the way out of this city in Texas, We were followed at high speed by a truck, pickup truck, with its lights off. Changed lanes when I did, sped up when I sped up, slowed down when I slowed down. I finally sped up to 90 miles an hour. It got up right behind us with its lights off. The kids were terrified. At the last minute, I took an exit because I was trained in surveillance and counter surveillance, sadly for whoever that was. I took an exit immediately too fast. He was following too close and he couldn't make the exit. And then we went and we hid for a while. All blacked out, redacted in the CIA's document. And as I'm doing now, all of this is available for public review. Here's diagnosis toxic exposure. I won't go through all of this. This was all redacted, and you can see as I scroll through, I do it slowly, you guys just don't have time to go through it all. This was all redacted in my manuscript. All the evidence. You can see what they did to it. Okay, yeah. And here's just more redactions that they did from my manuscript. None of this has anything to do with national security or classified information. All right. As I wrap up, how did the CIA get away with violating Executive Order 12356? As I just showed you earlier, this is a criminal act to conceal criminal activity on a secret CIA base. First, blackmail. They signed a settlement agreement based on my evidence, then threatened either we take a lower settlement or they would invoke the evidentiary privilege, or secretly called the state secrets privilege. And of course, we refused to be blackmailed, and they did that. Excuse me. Using the state secrets privilege, because they knew they'd violated Executive Order 12356, they sealed all of our personal injury suit evidence, sealed it in court. That was rubber stamped by the judge because the state secrets privilege, historically, when it's been invoked by the CIA or the NSA in the domestic spying case, the judges will just rubber stamp it. And I've got some information on that. Basically, they abdicate their job and defer to the CIA and the NSA and rubber stamp it. So we filed an appeal, and we filed an appeal with an attorney, I won't mention his name, who knew he was going to lose and charged us thousands of dollars anyway. But when the case went to appeal and the judge saw that it was a state secret service privilege case, he dismissed it immediately. The CIA then used the state secrets privilege to redact accounts of criminal activity by the CIA and from the company's shadows, threatened me and my family with prison, including my kids, if we discussed our case, even with our attorneys, because we were all bound by the state secrets privilege. CIA used the state secret privilege to make illegal redactions of damaging information exposing the CIA. So let me close with this. And I'll be doing more programs exposing the criminality and the illegal redactions that they did. I'm demanding Congress follow through on its dusty proposal. Congress proposed that there be a reform to the CIA pre-publication review process. Now it's named the Publication Classification Review Process. To reform it. I'm demanding that happen. It's been used in countless times to conceal CIA wrongdoing. There are, I'm sure, hundreds of CIA whistleblowers that have gone off in the shadows and suffered. Congress must pass legislation governing the CIA PCRB. 1, establish exact guidelines for what is legitimately classified information. 2, establish exact guidelines for information the CIA cannot legally redact. 3, establish penalties for CIA officials who violate Executive Order 12356, Chapter 1.6, subparagraph A. 4, require chain of custody by CIA officials who review the document. These documents presented to the PCRB by retired CIA officers and contractors, detailees, etc., they go into a black hole into the CIA. Nobody knows where they go. Nobody knows who reviews them. Nobody knows who tells the PCRB that this stuff is classified and they must black it out. So, require chain of custody by CIA officials by name, because at their level of position, they're not undercover, by name, who review the document. This must include the name and position of each CIA official that reviewed the document. That's A. B, the name and position of the CIA official responsible for requesting redactions and precise justification. C, an audit trail of each step in the classified review of the document with the name of the CIA official, the CIA office involved, and the dates of the review. 5, establish the maximum amount of time documents are held for review by the CIA. 6, establish whistleblower protection for PCRB employees who witness legal violations of the review process. In other words, I'm asking for protection of members of the PCRB when they are forced to redact something that is not classified but damaging to the CIA, that they are protected to come out to Congress, the select committees. I don't think they're much good, but that they're protected so they could come out and show with legal protection that the CIA is illegally redacting information. 7, provide Congress with an annual audit of documents redacted with chain of custody and specific reasons for redaction. Everyone, this is bringing the CIA underneath the Constitution of the United States of America, which is the supreme law of the land. And lastly, it will be the right of the American people to hold their congressmen and women and senators accountable for enforcing this new legislation. Violations of this legislation must result in budget restrictions for the CIA offices responsible for violations. Because the CIA illegally redacted the unclassified information I just showed you, I provided a copy of Twilight of the Shadow Government, which is coming out on October the 15th, to the CIA for review after contracting a co-author, and we begin writing the document, knowing that the CIA was going to try to do in this book what they did in From the Company of Shadows. I'm taking the personal risk, and I understand the risk, so that the CIA cannot redact the information that's in Twilight of the Shadow Government. It will be published. The CIA will come after me, and I will keep you publicly posted on their actions. Okay, I provided a copy of Twilight of the Shadow Government to the CIA after contracting a co-author, and in 90 days, after no response from the CIA, I submitted it, the manuscript, to the pre-publication, the pre-classification publication review board, the PCRB. Sorry. So I gave them 90 days to look at it. Didn't hear a peep, which it was not surprising. I was sure they would go at least 6 months. After that 90 days, then I submitted the manuscript to the publisher, courageous publisher, Skyhorse. Thank God for them, bringing us back to real freedom of speech and constitutional protection in the United States. I violated my CIA non-disclosure agreement to publicly expose CIA criminal redactions and use of the state secret privilege to conceal criminal activity. Okay, everyone, let me see here. Let me go back to, see if I can get you guys back here. There we go. Okay, there we have it. I will be giving more presentations on this. And I want you all to stay with me. The only support I have right now, they're gonna try to take the royalties, which I'm passing on to my wife and kids. They're gonna try to take those. They may try to take Twilight from the Twilight of the Shadow Government and accuse me of putting something in there classified. That won't work because there's nothing classified in there, and I have other witnesses that there's nothing classified in there. But this is very, very damaging to the CIA and exposure of its regular criminal activity in concealing information of its criminal actions, and as we reveal in Twilight of the Shadow Government, its criminal operations. This is the first time in history that I know of that a CIA officer has done this to this extent, but I am convinced that this has to be done. It has to be done now. I'm a person of faith. That's where I derive my strength from, and I will continue on. We will probably set up a GoFundMe page eventually, since they're taking the royalties from the book, but I'll keep you posted on that. So please forward this to everyone you know. I want to start an avalanche of public outcry against the CIA and its criminal activity. So forward this video to everyone you know. And as always, I love you guys. You're what keep me going. The notes I get back from you are just so inspiring, and I can tell you I need them. I need those encouraging notes from you all, and I go through them and I read them. I try to read them all, but there's a lot of them. But I appreciate them. They inspire me, and the support really helps. Anyway, love you guys dearly, and I'll see you on the next program.